welcome everybody. Thank you for having us. My name's Rick Barron. I'll try and moderate this if I can. What we thought we would do first is just introduce ourselves so you have a perspective, and then following that, we may actually ask some of you to introduce yourselves so that we get an idea of the audience also. I'm Rick Barron. I've been classified, I guess, as serial, as in the CFO entrepreneurial space, not serial as in killer and those things, in keeping with Goodfellas.
Good segmentation.
Yeah, really, it was a segue. My history is I've taken several companies public, two of which in the med device company, a large spinal implant company, and an insulin infusion pump company. I also found out this morning I have a tie to Francisco, who put up on the screen that Alzheimer's scan. One of the companies I was with developed the product that's put into the PET machines for that, and I never knew Francisco existed until today. So, small world show. So I will now turn this over to David.
Good afternoon. I am Dave Shepard, principal at MedWorld Advisors. My background comes out of the medical device industry. Been about 30 years. Worked with small companies, large companies, but most of my experience comes out of working with some of the big MNCs, companies like C.R. Bard, Tyco Healthcare, which became Covidien, then became, now it's Medtronic, of course. So pretty soon it's going to be Medtronic, J&J, and probably Google, right, as far as the companies in the industry. My roles, I ran several business units, did some M&A activity, also ran strategic alliances, ran a global team that we worked with over 100 companies around the world. And after I left the MNC, started working with smaller companies using the playbook that we learned on the corporate side. So we worked mostly with the emerging technology companies and then middle market companies. Turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dave. My name is Teresa Gonzal. My background is scientific in nanomedicine and also entrepreneur. I started my own biotech company after I studied an MBA and being in the lab because I wanted to really get what we were doing in the lab towards the market. So that was my passion always. Then I was working in HIV prevention in my company. And when we licensed out our main assets, I passed on to consulting, and I started to work on valuation of pharmaceutical assets and medical device assets as a third-party evaluator prior to fundraisings. Right now, I joined an M&A firm. So yeah, I'm very excited because in this role, I can also do what I dream of. It was help people to place the products and their dreams into place because I'm happy to connect them with sources of capital.
Okay, thank you. Enzo Villani, equities.com. I am not Joe Pesci. I know you guys are all actually disappointed at that. But I do know that movie quite well. I actually watched it in college about 500 times. I run equities.com. We're a fintech platform that's focused on the emerging growth sector. So basically, we cover companies that range between about a $50 million market cap, barely at the low end, to about $1 billion market cap. So most of our companies that we cover from a fin media standpoint are firms that are listed on the New York Stock Exchange or the actual NASDAQ. And they range from about $100 million market cap. We see a lot of biotech firms. We see a lot of medical device companies. We do work with some micro-cap companies like OTC, but the equities platform is really a platform that's the first of its kind to actually bring together the buyers and sellers of, or really the investors and the people looking to raise capital on one platform. And we also offer the first flat fee online trading platform on our site for $29 a month, so it's unlimited trading. So we're really trying to break the mold of old Wall Street. We're all former NASDAQ executives. I started something called actually NASDAQ Corporate Solutions back in 2002 at NASDAQ. It's now 18,000 corporate clients and about $1 billion in revenue. It kind of changed the way the NASDAQ actually competes for listings. And now when I looked at the microcap market, or I looked at the small cap market, we said, how can we fix this part of the marketplace so more of you can find funding and more of you can get exposure? So that's really the focus.
What we'd like to understand, so we get an idea of the financing help that you might need, is how many people here work for companies that need money? Anybody? I am really surprised not everybody raised their hand. I mean, that's absolutely a given in this world. How many people here are founders of companies that are either currently looking for money or are at the C-level of a team that is looking for money? Okay, so there are a couple people here that you probably want to meet after this. There are people that have access to capital or can help, but that's an important thing. How many people here are consultants? Just pure, not in the financial sense, but just regulatory or other things? Thank you, and any financial consultants here? Oh, good, you and me. So that's a good thing. Oh, he doesn't want to give that away. So it is a little odd that we're talking about financing after seeing a movie about Goodfellas, but we're going to try and talk about legitimate money, not money from a certain group of people in a certain section of New York. And we're going to try and do it this way. But what I thought we would do is start off with a question that I will ask the panel. We'd like to make this as interactive as possible, so please think about questions. We have a script, but it's going to be better if you ask and we answer, rather than we just go through a bunch of questions that we thought might be relevant. So what we thought we would start with is, if you're an entrepreneur with a great idea, because I'm sure some of you here have that great idea, do you raise money? Do you build a company? How do you make that decision to go in one way or the other? So I'm going to start with Teresa, who volunteered to start it off, and then the panel can speak in.
That's perfect. Well, I started 2 companies, so now with all the things I learned, I will better build a MVP and minimal viable product to check who is my customers, if there is a market, and how much market can I have, because maybe a great idea, but maybe you don't have the market that is needed to succeed. So first I will try to do everything right before maybe even building the company as a whole. And then if that's right, the answer is yes, then of course raise funds as much as you can.
So I've raised about $500 million in roll-ups and some startup money. This company now, I've raised money from a family office, about $7 million, and they keep on giving us more money. The family office thing is a little weird because it's their own money, and they don't have any real mandates. They don't really have any policies. They just say, "I'll write you a check." It's kind of strange. I would recommend doing your homework. If you plan to start I would first come up with what you want to do, but then I would plan to start meeting the people who you think are more likely to be in the crowd that want to invest, and don't ask them for any money. Just go in there and meet them and get them to meet you and understand your idea and understand your strategy and your passion. And then at some point, I think you'll start to understand maybe when you need to really raise the money. But the first thing that I would never do is walk into an angel group. I wouldn't do that like right away, because you're building a company. Your job is not to always raise money. So I would focus on building the company and then come up with the models and the ideas of how you want to raise the capital. But do your homework and make sure you're not going for bad. There is good money and there's bad money out there, actually. So he's right. That's a little bit exaggerating the Goodfellas thing, but it's close to it. So I would be cognizant of the types of people that you get involved with, and anyone that tells you that you can go public as a startup, be extremely wary of them. And I'm in the industry. I'm not from microcap, but I would just say, just be wary of them and do your homework. Google their names, do some background checks, okay?
My name is Shoshana Friedman. I'm a consultant. I just want to understand a little bit better. I mean, I don't think you're referring to mafia money, but what is bad money for investment in a medical device company?
So I'll give you an example from a recent client who was going after a segment that is one of the giant killer kind of type of segments. And when I first met them, they basically were going anywhere and everywhere searching for money and doing the things that Anzo was just talking about, talking to people that had all kinds of different kinds of money, and they were exposing themselves to situations that probably could put their company at risk. And so I was able to, fortunately, get to them at a time where they were starting to make decisions about which path they were going to go down to. And just gave them some advice to look at where they were going and get people that were actually involved that actually would care about this industry and their company. Because there's lots of people that want to make money by investing money, but the ones that actually care about this industry and are willing to work with you and understand what it's going to take in this industry, because even the giant killer ideas, those can take 5-7 years before somebody gets a real good return. And so they did that. They backed up, and now they just raised a $2 million Series A with somebody who's actually going to back it and help them on a strategic path that's going to make sense for them.
Yes, and I will add, and it's very easy to compare to marriage as well, because when you get money from a partner and it becomes your partner, and it can be hell if it is the bad decision and the bad partner. So it adds to the other's comment. Bad money doesn't mean mafia. It is more strategic. Who are you being associated with? Like he mentioned angels, so maybe you better not dilute so much your ownership. Better maybe think in the long term. Who you are associated with, maybe you will have more chances to get to the big picture if you associate with the right people. So that's more or less. It's also called smart money to do that. Okay.
So, great question. It actually jump-started our next question. So for a group like this, I guess the question is, what kind of money do you take? And I'm not talking about, money with pictures of presidents on it versus kings and queens and other such things. But when do you decide to take angel money, and maybe what is that as you talk through it? When do you decide that you might do debt? Or there's a gentleman here I met yesterday who does licensing of technology. So there's all sorts of money that you can take, all sorts of ways to finance your entity. So as an entrepreneur, as someone that's looking to raise money, what are the inflection points? How do you decide which form of financing to take? Is it length of time, the amount of money, the sophistication of device, or what is that thought process that you go through?
So that brings up some very interesting scenarios, because I know when you're looking for money, it seems like there's no options available when you're pitching to people and the doors closed. But what I would start with is saying, before I get to answer the question, is don't get discouraged. I have a friend of mine who was a former president of a $500 million division of a major multinational company, and now he's semi-retired. He's on the board of a few companies. One is an Israeli startup company with very bright people. He is in aerospace, which is a very interesting segment. He told me their last fundraise, it took them 128 pitches to get funded. And this is a company with smart people and good pedigrees. So don't get discouraged, but you need to understand what it is that you want and be dedicated and persistent to look for that. So if you're thinking about licensing, that is a path, but you need to make sure that you talk to somebody, like Teresa or Anzo or Rick or somebody, myself, that understands what that's going to mean for you down the road. Because if you go too fast on a licensing path, you could end up giving away your company in 3 to 5 years and not even realizing it. So you need to understand really where you want to be You're going back to the whole thing about think about the end in mind, where you want to be in 3, 5, 7 years, and then look for that kind of money. In some cases, you don't really want to. If you're the kind of person that doesn't want to build a company, licensing can be a great path for you to go down to, because you can let somebody else build the company and you can take the rewards from that.
Well, little to add, just I would say when you're in a pre-revenue stage, a startup, I will essentially go to venture capital, and that is specialized and they understand what it means to develop a medical device. And then when the company starts making revenues and start marketing their products, the idea will be there are more sources of capital, and it depends on the capital structure of your company. You can also add debt, which is something that a lot of entrepreneurs are scared, like no debt, and that's a mistake, because you can grow tremendously your company if you accept debt into your capital structure, and you don't dilute your ownership. So that's another point. And there's plenty of possibilities once you cross the break-even point in private equity firms and family offices, and of course also let's not forget about the big corporations, the venture side of them.
So how many people here have like a software type of device, or like an app type of device, or something that's more of a B2C type of device? Anyone? You got one, two, a couple. Okay, so most of you are going to be B2B. So I would definitely not go the route of crowd financing or crowdfunding. No, don't do any of that, because anything that's too complicated won't get picked up. And you'll waste your money and your time. I would also say come up with because your products are probably complicated. If you're all like PhDs and so on and so forth, I would try to be honest, just simplify it to 10 slides, make it simple, easy to really understand, and go speak to angel investors first, and friends and family. Small amounts, so that, and don't use the money like to go buy a jet ski or anything stupid like that. But just stick to really close circles, and I would focus on that first. And then once you get past that stage, if you get past that stage, then other things will start to really open up to you. But I would get after the angel stage, I'd probably get an advisor. I'm not an advisor, but I would probably get one, because you want people who are going to watch your back and make sure that you can actually kind of communicate the way you want to communicate, what the real value proposition is. Because the problem is, in most cases with scientists and medical type folks, is that they go too deep into the weeds, and it's very hard to get the core benefit of what they're trying to pitch you. So that's what I see, and I would just kind of warn against that.
Hi, my name is Nathan, and I have a question. If someone, let's say, has an idea for a product, but it is more targeted into like a niche group or a small group of population, and to me, when I'm thinking of it, it doesn't look very appealing from an investor, because I don't really see how to make money out of it, but there's a real need from real people for this one. So what are the options for getting funds for these type of things?
So let me repeat and make sure that I have the question right. So this gets into the type of product that you're developing. It's a niche product. It's not something that's widely used. It's not going to be on the level of a disease like diabetes or something like that. But it will benefit, in what you've defined, a certain population. So why would someone invest?
And I believe he also said there wasn't that much potential for profit.
To me, when I think of it, because of this, like population-wise, less than 1% of the population can really benefit, but those people can benefit from a product like that. And how to get funds or to develop this thing? Who can help?
So I'll make a couple comments and then pass to whoever. whether or not you realize that 1% of the US population is a very large population. That's 3 million people in excess. So even though it's not the 100 million people or 60 million people of certain other disease states or certain other things, that alone creates a big number. You know, it's not a billion, but it is 3 million. It then goes to develop the plan. How much money do you need? And how will you pay back an investor? When we've talked a little bit about taking money, the one thing you have to remember about taking money is if you take it in the form of debt, you're going to have to pay it back. If you take it in the form of equity, everybody but your friends and family will definitely be looking for a return. And your friends and family, if they don't get a return of some kind, even maybe the principal, may cease being your friend or your family. That does happen over time. So part of it is living within your means. How much do I need? Why do I need it? How do I pay people back?
So that's really a good question. Because I think, you know, it depends upon if you have something where it's one or two items, so is it really like a product line versus a company, or is it, can you build a platform and build it into a company? Because if you can build it into a company, then you have all the options that we've been talking about up here. If it's something where it's really going to be a product that might fit into an extension of another type of company, then what, like Teresa was talking about, getting involved with strategics. And I know strategics are hard to get a hold of a lot of times, but realize that they are looking for innovation. And so if you can find a way to prove to them, you treat them just like a VC, and you can prove to them that you have something. They'll probably ask you to really validate that, but you may be a nice way to be a line extension for them, and that could be a path for you.
Yeah, adding to that, maybe we'll figure out foundations that are raised with the problem you're trying to target. And I know in the conference I met these investors that are, one of them, they are located in France, and they are not investing by the profitability, but the impact on the world. So you may think out of the box of the typical entrepreneur, like, how do I find I don't know, Melinda Bill Gates Foundation or other people that may give you the starting capital to grow, but I will go that way. So who is patients advocacy, who is providing the services, go that way, because maybe that helps.
Yeah, I kind of agree on the same path. You know, the one thing that I didn't think about on the crowdfinancing side or crowdfunding side online is that if you find champions or you find people that are living with people who have this type of sickness or are in this group, they might rally around you. But now you have your investors are the people who have potentially the sickness or know someone. So that really does create you know, I think even a huge moral burden on you personally. That you know, now you're really a champion of this group, and it could be it's a large enough group, right? I mean, 3 million people is a lot of people.
The other thing I would add to this discussion is, and you touched on something good here, is there are specific funds that are looking for populations like Teresa mentioned, but also some that are looking for the emerging markets, and not emerging technology, but actually products for the emerging markets, like India, like in Africa, that sort of thing. And if your product has a niche for that, sometimes you can get funded by one of those holistic types of funds that's looking how they can go make an impact in that part of the world. That could get the company started, and you get enough funds, and maybe you could bring it back to the developed market from there.
Shoshana.
Oh, you know my name already. That's okay. I will stop. A quick question. I know that you know before investing in something, you want to know what the market is and how big it will be and the investment. But what are the other elements that interest you? For example, from the regulatory point of view, from the clinical point of view, what are the other things that you see as very important before you make a decision to invest?
I'll be quick on this. I basically, so I'm not really a medical tech kind of investor. If I invest, I'm mostly a fintech. Like, I know my space. These folks know their space. There are probably critical things that I think that are like it's like a KPI, they're key metrics that they're probably looking for. And I would say that you want to be within that range, whatever that metric is.
Well, I would say the criteria that investors are looking for is like a growth, and also market and growth are major parameters in deciding, and stability, because uncertainty is coming next year, so that's why they want to allocate resources.
So in our case, we're advisors, so we're not really directly investing, but we help connect people with money. So what we're looking at is do we think really somebody feasibly would be interested in this? And so that comes to a lot of the factors, and growth is one of them, market segment. Geography all plays a part in that. So there's a lot of criteria that we look at, but we have to think it's feasible in order for, I think, for any of us to take it on, because we don't want to take your time and mislead you if we don't think there is a path for you.
Enzo, I want to ask a quick question. You were mentioning crowdfunding. What do you think about Regulation A+.
Okay, so there are a bunch of different ways to crowdfund. It depends on where you are. So the Regulation A+ is really for what's called Tier 2, which is for raising up to $50 million. That's more for, I think, a company that has already raised a couple of million. There's crowdfunding CF, which is basically up to $1 million now. That's an easier, much cheaper approach, and there are sites that are just dedicated to it. Doesn't cost you a lot of money to try. And then there's the 506C, which is a Reg D offering, which is basically a general marketing of accredited investors can only invest. If I was doing a B2B medical device type company, I probably would do a CF first, maybe, if it worked, but probably a 506C so that I can go after the accredited investor.
I'm Sajani Thomas, President of Global Integrated Reimbursement Services, Inc., and our clients usually do a landscape assessment in order to get money. The investors like to know that the technology is viable, that insurers will cover and pay for it. And so we're most commonly asked, and they're usually successful once they've done that research.
So thank you. That's probably the most important point. I think almost everybody in this room, whether you're part of a company, a consultant, regulatory, or whatever, has been involved in due diligence. The answer to your question is, for most areas of money, you're going to have to disclose everything that you can think of disclosing for them. And they either will do it through your disclosure proactively to them in an offering document or some sort of a memo, or they will bring in people like many of you to come in and understand the technology or the device or whatever better. So regulatory gets involved. So prior to going out, the first step is get your ducks in order. If you've done prior rounds, know who owns your company, know how much you owe. If you've worked with other people, go start talking to them. So it's a matter of letting them piece by piece or total, depending upon the strategy, get to know your company as thoroughly as is appropriate under the circumstance. Another question, please.
Thank you. Gary Dulac, Neuromotics. I'm the CEO and founder. Been fundraising for about 7 months, and I'm finding early stage med tech is a desert. So just your thoughts on how to overcome that. Do you think it's coming back, and things along that nature?
Gary? Yeah, Gary, so that's been a challenge really for about the last 4 or 5 years. You can see the curves on the VC funding where medtech has gone down as biotech and pharma has gone up. And then now this thing called digital healthcare has this big bubble hanging around Silicon Valley at the moment. So it's interesting to observe how that's trending. And so you're right, it's not easy to be able to find money for any specific project. It's early stage in medtech, seed, Series A, that sort of thing. It does happen. It does take persistence. It does take a look at ways of being creative, how you get to people, looking at investors, super angels, VCs, even look at non-dilutive paths. A company that we were working with in Europe, met them 2 years ago, actually through to be part of this whole community. It was able to help them get into a program called Horizon 2020 in Europe. And they were able to go, with getting a little bit of consulting help through myself, but also some other people as well. They were about 150 on the list of over thousands of companies that apply for this thing, but they only funded the top 5 every year. But after getting a little bit of help, they were able to refine their message. They were number 3, and they got $4.1 million of non-dilutive funding. And I think every CFO will tell you that's love money, right?
Any money you get is a lot of money. So I'd like to congratulate you at the beginning of your cycle. So even though it seems like a long time and seems endless, you're probably in the middle part of your funding, or funding tries. And the odd thing about funding is very few people go beyond that first offer of good money. However, I would encourage you to continue to fund even after you've gotten the dollar that you need for this round. If you're the CEO, it doesn't stop on the day that you get the check. The next round starts.
He's right. So, the actual famous movie, Glenn Ross, and actually Alec Baldwin's up there, and he's like ABC, always be closing. As a CEO, and I'm CEO, and I've done this a couple times myself, it's ABR, always be raising, because you're always talking to the next investor who might see the next level, maybe in a year from now. You always have to keep those conversations going, because you don't want to be walking in there cold when you're desperate for the money. You want to be walking in there when you have really nice numbers and things are going in the right direction.
It's a small piece, follow-up, let's say monthly, with updates. Any update is good news, like I've been doing this and I've been completing this part, or any update is welcome. Without anything else, they will remind them that you're there.
So you're Gary, Cheryl. So here's a person who's looking to invest in company. This is a gentleman that needs money. So I'm only doing what Joe is going to do in a little while. You now only have to find 19 more people to exchange business cards with. So please. Also tomorrow, sorry Joe, but there's the panel on pitches and stuff like that. So it's refining your pitch. It's doing those things. So I've segued into that. I'm going to move back into, so we've gotten it financed. There's a product that you've developed because you've chosen to do it. When do you decide to sell? What are some good hints as to when the time is?
So that's always an interesting question when you're working with people that are running a company. Sometimes they don't get to decide if they decide early on to sign some contracts. Just said they were going to sell at a certain time, but hopefully you're beyond those. And then it really becomes something that's really important to think about, is to step back and think about what are your objectives, and what are your objectives for your company, your legacy, and so what are you going to be, if you're thinking ahead to 5 or 10 years after you're out, what did you want that company to be, or do you care because it's about the money that you were able to optimize in it. And there's no wrong answer in that, but it's important. I've seen people that have sold to a strategic or to a private equity firm, and then they were just torn up 5 years later because they tore up the company, and the company at the bottom made a lot of money, and he made a lot of money on the way out. But that's, once you give it up, you give it up. So you have to think that through before you go down that path. But the bottom line is when it's not fun for you anymore, because most people are getting into this because this is fun for you. You got to have a passion about it in some way. You want to have an impact. When it's no longer fun, I think that's the time to either think about selling, or if it's not quite right to sell, maybe recapitalizing and let somebody else do a little more of the work.
Okay. Yes. I will add that in Inverters, we really care about the motivations, and that's important. What Dave said is so important. And when we have the first meetings, people avoid the personal feelings or what their aim in the future, or what are the dreams. And I think that's the conversation that should be going when somebody wants to sell their company or to find a partner, because we need to find a partner that makes those dreams come true. Either it's an acquisition, or it's a recapitalization, or it's a private equity firm, or it's a strategic investor from China or from Europe. in any case, there's so many dreams as people, so every person is different, every owner is different, so we try to address this, and for us it's pivotal that we should understand what's the motivation is, because we don't want to have this 5 years post-traumatic experience. And some of the people we serve, they are worried about the legacy. Legacy means sometimes how my employees will be treated in the future. So I don't want to sell my company to somebody that's going to fire them. So let's make this a priority. So let's find somebody that acquires you, and in the contract it is that their employees must be at least X time there, or conditions that you were worried about them. Anything can be solved, anything can be negotiated. So all those things that we think, oh, those are not important for the business, maybe for an owner, or for somebody has been working so hard for that company, 20 years, and it's important to save this legacy, and I think that's not trivial.
I think that's one of the hardest questions to answer. I'm usually on the buy side and rolling up firms and then selling out at a bigger, which is more driven by like a private equity firm, so I don't really have a say. I just think it's a hard question to answer. I think that you have to do it when don't sell out, just try not to sell out when you're feeling desperate. That's what I would say. I would say, like recognize your peak in the company, or recognize the company's peak, and then, or try to. And then if you can, then, and then you know what? You'll sell it when the buyers show up, to be quite honest. I think the buyers show up and they'll say, we want to buy your company. And you'll say, okay, not really, maybe.
So any other questions from the group? Yes, sir. Thank you, Vanna.
Yeah, R.A. Halpern. Question to ask you, it's two parts to the question. What are you looking at risk mitigation factors in a presentation on a product when one's looking for, startup funding for is the first question. So what are the key elements that you're looking for from a risk mitigation to reduce that risk? And then the second part is, in terms of the funding rounds that one's looking for, should one break up the fundings based upon a traditional product lifecycle development process, like here's what you need on phase A in terms of, I don't know, you've already gone through the IP process and now you're looking to put together your design, start getting into the development. So is the funding rounds that you're looking for, is that based on a product lifecycle platform? And then what are the key risk mitigation elements that you would be looking for as potential investors, or you say your advisors, to help reduce that risk up front from an investor's perspective?
Okay, so I'm actually going to break that up into two questions. We're going to deal with the risk first, and then we'll deal with the second question, okay? So on the risk, I guess I look at things as follows. I look at management. That's key. What do they know? How experienced are they? Who's involved? It's not just the CEO. Are there other people around? It depends upon the size of the company, obviously. But I'm going to look at management. I'm going to look at the engineering/regulatory behind a product, so I understand the depth of knowledge, the completeness, the stage, and those types of things. And I'll look at market. I obviously have to because of that small product that may or may not ever. And then I'll look at the financials. But I'll probably redo my financials that, from what you gave me, I'll probably do them over again because no one ever believes the CFO. It's my lot in life.
Mm-hmm. So that's really a good question, and not a lot of entrepreneurs actually really think that through. So I'm glad that you asked. So first of all, it is team. Any investor will tell you the first thing is team. If they don't like the team, they run regardless of what the opportunity is. But then after that, as far as the early stage startup, it's really around the IP and the potential for the IP, because you're going into a space where there is a lot of IP already established. So the question is, is there going to be a pathway? And something that every entrepreneur needs to understand, and I find not always do, is even a minimum freedom to operate. Because if you can't get into a freedom to operate realm, you won't get investment, and then you get bonus money for getting good patents filed and being able to clear a space with that. So then it's clinical. So obviously, what's your clinical path? Obviously, PMA3 is that's a longer road. Fewer investors want to get involved with there versus Class 1 or Class 2 devices. And then do you have a good pathway? Do you understand what you have to do to be able to get there? And then, what this lady back here said earlier is reimbursement. In today's world, if you don't have reimbursement, it's very tough to get the funding.
Oh, on this one, I would just say, so I don't know about the actual tech side of this, but from the emotional side, the investor has to believe that you're going to protect his money like the way you would protect your own. That's really it. And then what was the second question? Oh, so you were talking more about a kind of technical issue about how to actually develop the actual products, and is it close to how you actually develop as your products on the corporate side?
I've done startups in the top 3 med device companies. So from the upstream product innovation side, coming up with the idea, the plans, and everything else, putting together the business plans, regulatory strategies, clinical trial strategies, and everything else. From the funding perspective, though, now I'm, working for the med device companies was relatively easy. I'm not going up there begging for money. Here, there's certain processes. We follow that. Looking to raising the funding now, when you're talking about a round A or round B, in putting together the financials, should we break the financials down following a traditional product lifecycle development plan to present to potential investors and say, for this phase A, I need this amount. Phase B is this, I need this amount. Understanding that that investor may not look at the whole element, he may do the initial round of that, but what should that breakdown strategy be on that?
Well, I can assure you, based on what we were doing in venture evaluation when we were assessing a drug or a product in development and potential licensing out to another company, we will usually do the deal structure upon milestones. So we will divide the total amount of this, the licensing into milestones. So you protect the buyer, the acquirer, and also the seller gets amounts as soon as he's hitting milestones. So let's say you have a deal, $50 million, and so you may get upfront $5 million, and if you get to, let's say, approval, regulatory, or certain milestones that are pre-arranged, then you will get it through.
And I think that's more of a kind of a classic, like biotech, pharma type of milestone that you're talking on. And in med device, going to what Rick Renzo said is everything is negotiable. So I really haven't seen there's been any one particular way, because the first thing that happens when you show your product development plan is nobody believes it anyways. What they really come back to, if they're interested in investing with you, they're going to believe in you, as Rick talked about, because they believe in the team. They're going to believe in, they're going to look at the market opportunity. Is there a pathway there? Is there a reimbursement there? And then they're going to negotiate with you, figure out what makes sense. Because obviously you don't want to give away too much too fast in terms of equity, but you need to have enough to run with, as Rick was talking about.
As we close the panel, I would like to ask the final question, and that is, we covered a lot of material today, and I'm sure you all are passionate on one or more topics in this arena. I would like you to finish this sentence. If you remember nothing else I've said today, please remember what? What is the single biggest takeaway you can offer the crowd and those watching later? Enzo goes first.
Just stay true to yourself, keep your actual kind of integrity, and don't get fooled by stakeholder salesmen.
Be passionate about what you're doing, and yes, be yourself.
I was going to say the same thing is you have to get up every morning and love what you do. So stay true to you and what your passion is, and it's all going to work out one way or the other.
I'm lucky because I could say everything that they said, and really an answer to you, I think. Develop the plan and then pivot. because the plan that you've developed today will change in a year or two, depending upon the strength of your product, the length of time it takes to develop. You can go angel A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That tends to be because you need that many rounds, or get lucky and find someone that takes you all the way through. So it's develop the plan, pivot, and develop a new plan, pivot, develop a new plan, pivot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you, Joe.
Enzo, Teresa, Dave, and Rick, thank you very much. Let's hear for our panel.